I call the next member to speak in the debate. Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I must start by saying one of the worst jobs that any government has to do is to tax its constituents. And no matter which government is in power, no government takes any joy in doing this, Madam Speaker, when they are in government. And I certainly know that when Labor was in government, we made sure that any decision made around revenue measures were properly debated and explained to the community prior to them coming into force. And from the outset, Madam Speaker, Mr Deputy Speaker, I can confirm that the Labor opposition will be supporting this bill. We are hopeful that the CLP government's assumption that payroll tax cut will help to stimulate the growth is correct, and that the end growth will make up for the predicted $52 million shortfall that moving forward hopefully will be recuperated, as the CLP government has said, Madam Speaker. And when we talk about informing our communities around those very important bits of legislation that really do affect different parts of the Northern Territory, this is one of those bills that will provide hopefully some more clarity and detail around what the processes are around government revenue and the decision to change the payroll tax here in the Northern Territory. Mr Deputy Speaker, the last Australian Government Grants Commission assessment during our former Territory Labor government term assessed that the Northern Territory had the lowest taxation in the country. And this was something that was done by design, and we know that raising taxes are often very difficult for the Northern Territory, for Territorians, everyday Territorians, for our small, medium and even our large businesses who come to the Territory to do business and provide those services and options, and big industry here in the Territory. Mr Deputy Speaker, the issue of payroll tax is a complex one for the Northern Territory. Just about every Chamber of Commerce in Australia has said that it is complex, inefficient and also can be detrimental to businesses around the country. In the Territory context, Mr Deputy Speaker, due to our limited tax base here in the NT, payroll tax is the largest and most important contributor to Territory own source revenue. Even the Langerland report, which we know the government are now keen to champion, stated that there appears to be little evidence to support the need for significant reform in the Territory's payroll tax arrangements. Whilst today, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Labor opposition is supporting the bill, there are still several questions unanswered which will come through. Hopefully the Treasurer will be able to address these questions and concerns in his wrapping speech. Mr Deputy Speaker, we know that there will be an impact to the Northern Territory's budget, and if we go by the figures that were released before the Territory election in August, this will see that the Territory's budget will decrease by $56 million. For anyone keeping count around the rolling tally of the CLP government's spending commitments, we now see that as $322 million, Mr Acting Speaker. And we will need to find somewhere that means that the budget cuts will be made up at some point. So we assume that that's where the prediction is by the Chief Minister and her team. Love to have that confirmation again through the Treasurer's reply. Mr Deputy Speaker, I keep saying acting, I apologise. Mr Deputy Speaker, at some point we urge the CLP government to come clean to Territorians about what they intend to cut to pay for the commitments. The CLP is very good at promoting who are the winners of the changes that they make and instill. However, they are not so great and honest and open when it comes to announcing and being upfront with Territorians about who are the losers of any decision, policy or cut that they make. Mr Deputy Speaker, I think it's quite pertinent at this point to recognise some of our extremely hard-working corrections officers in the Northern Territory who have been placed under significant pressure through some of those changes that the CLP government have implemented over the last 4 to 6 months of their tenure. And I recognise that many of our corrections officers put their lives at risk every day in a very high-risk environment. We know they're hard-working Territorians. They're our mums, our dads, our aunties, our uncles. our friends and family members who work in a very, very high-risk environment to do a very professional job, Mr Deputy Speaker, on behalf of Territorians in keeping our communities safe by working in the corrections system. I do know, Mr Deputy Speaker, that a lot of our corrections officers are very strong advocates for justice in the Northern Territory. They're very strong professionals when it comes to keeping our communities safe, and they absolutely deserve a very strong voice to be heard. And some of these changes that the CLP government have made and not committed to providing information around the funding absolutely affect Territorians day in and day out, and our corrections professionals, some of who are here in the gallery today, are extremely distressed and very nervous about the decisions. And we've heard from the peak union that represents our corrections staff and officers and workers that the fear and stress amounting by our corrections staff is that one of our staff, corrections staff, will indeed come under fire at some point in the intense environment, and perhaps we don't want to see any workplace injuries, but there is a huge fear, Mr Deputy Speaker, that our corrections staff will be put at further risk with the decisions that are being made currently of the CLP government, that a corrections officer will be injured or worse, fatally injured, Mr Deputy Speaker. So I think it is pertinent to recognise the great work of our corrections staff. We know many of them are now spending some time, particularly today, their own personal time or time through their union work to front the government, and I do hope that the Deputy Chief Minister, who is the Minister responsible for corrections, listens and talks directly to our corrections officers, because what looks good on paper in the budget, and we're talking about payroll tax today and the legislation that is for debate right now, but saving $1 somewhere, and we heard a big motherhood statement by the Treasurer just before, the lack of investment, but the lack of care and knowledge of real people, real Territorians working to keep our community safe behind the wire. Some of them are here in the gallery today, which we're honoured, but we thank them on behalf of the Labor opposition. We thank you all for your amazing work in a job that is often very tough, unseen, and unfortunately often forgot about by fellow Territorians, and we don't want the CLP government to forget about our corrections team. Mr Deputy Speaker, we know that in general Territorians support tax cuts, but every Territorian wants to make sure this is not at the expense of our schools, our hospitals, our frontline services like police and corrections. We are also concerned, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the loss of this revenue will result in subpar wage offers being put to our frontline public servants, particularly when it comes to enterprise bargaining agreement negotiations. Mr Deputy Speaker, $322 million is a lot of money to be unfunded for with those commitments that the CLP government have already spoken about in the last 6 months, and we already know some of the losers in that, and that's the northern suburbs. We know that the CLP was not up front prior to the Territory election, and they made the decision to completely cut the underground high voltage power program, that the power program was not part of the CLP's open, accountable commitments and decisions, and as I quote the Chief Minister, the year of action. And I would be very concerned for those representing the northern suburbs that now your constituents have been let down by your CLP government. Mr Deputy Speaker, undergrounding power was literally just about to roll out in those northern suburbs, and I know that residents were looking forward to it, but unfortunately it's now out the window, and there is no plan by the CLP on when that will be brought back into the fold. Mr Deputy Speaker, it's very clear they were intending to scrap undergrounding power before the election, but did not tell anyone that if they were elected that they would do this. This is a very tricky move by the CLP government, and they need to be accountable for those decisions done behind Territorians' backs. Mr Deputy Speaker, it would be very interesting to see what happens as our severe weather and climate change increases here in the Northern Territory, and what the CLP government will do for future plans, particularly around the northern suburbs and the underground power program, which they have now scrapped. Mr Deputy Speaker, the CLP also hasn't provided any details about additional funding that will be invested to ensure that interstate businesses aren't taking advantage of higher payroll tax threshold. The CLP say this tax break will stimulate the economy because it will allow businesses to bring on more staff. That sounds good in theory, Mr Deputy Speaker. However, I doubt that the CLP has modelled this to back up their claim. It would be unconscionable for the CLP to give a tax break to interstate companies who take money and run without any intention of investing these tax breaks and the dollars back into the Northern Territory. Mr Deputy Speaker, this bill also does nothing for businesses who have a wage bill of less than $1.5 million, so our very small Territory businesses, Mr Deputy Speaker. It is unfortunate that the CLP has forgotten about these businesses, many of them local family-run Territory firms and companies. It is not good enough that the CLP has no plan to support these smaller Territory family businesses. Many of these small businesses, as we know, are the backbone to the Territory, and they are usually 100% Territory-owned and operated, and deserve that the government of the day also supports them. Mr Deputy Speaker, good intentions and media releases will only get you so far when you're in government, but what really matters to Territorians is being serious about supporting them. We would like to see the CLP release a package of support for these small businesses also. Mr Deputy Speaker, this bill also provides a payroll tax exemption for apprentices and trainees. We are supporting this measure in particular. It is one of the few things the CLP is doing to support young people instead of demonising them, Mr Deputy Speaker. But it should be noted that the last CLP government who took away this exemption away previously, and at the time the CLP Treasurer, Dave Tollner, was a mentor of, I believe, the Chief Minister. When the former Treasurer, Dave Tollner, was in government, the mantra was the way in which exemption operation makes it efficient and open to misuse. The exemption is not result-driven, and that some employers can obtain an exemption even if an apprentice does not complete a course. The exemption is untargeted and not focused on sectors where there are workforce shortages, and that small employers receive no benefit from it as they pay no payroll tax. Mr Deputy Speaker, the government should heed the warning of their former mentor and ensure that the intent of the changes is being complied with, and that the new exemption is not being used to undercut paying workers, which they are entitled to. It should also serve as a reminder that those opposite in the government are there in other ways to help businesses, and not just the one trick pony of what they've proposed. Mr Deputy Speaker, if this payroll tax is the only plan the CLP has to support apprentices, then we are unlikely to see an increase in training opportunities for young Territorians or Territorians who are looking to change career and profession. It should be a concern for all that we have not heard anything from the CLP government around compliance and the compliance measures and how they're policing the new exemptions. So if the Treasurer can address that in his reply, it would be most appreciated. Mr Deputy Speaker, while we're supporting this bill, the CLP government cannot for a moment say that their job is done and ignore our small businesses for the rest of the term. During our time in government, Territory Labor spent close to $11 billion in infrastructure programs alone just to back our Territory businesses, many of whom are continuing to see that pipeline of works until perhaps the CLP budget in May. To date, we've heard nothing about what the CLP will do to boost the Territory economy. What is their vision? We would love to understand the CLP's vision about the economy. Attacking the Environment Centre and creating task force sounds great to obviously the CLP government, but unfortunately they're not actually plans for the future. Scrapping the debt ceiling and scrapping the mechanism for accountability and reporting to Parliament is also not an accountable measure by the new government. Scrapping housing construction targets, which the Treasurer is also responsible for, indicates the lack of understanding and maturity of the CLP, that they are out of their depth and lack vision when it comes to supporting social and affordable housing options in our urban areas. And I know, Mr Deputy Speaker, the member for Barkly, one of the fiercest advocates for the Barkly around Tennant Creek housing, is part of that team who is neglecting urban housing investment. This seems absolutely crazy, Mr Deputy Speaker, when it comes to the work that Labor has already done formally in government in making sure there was a strong and sustained investment in housing in our remote communities. We got to the tip of the iceberg and including Homelands now in that new national 10-year partnership agreement, which the CLP can continue to take their selfies in the Barkly and claim the good victory of Territory Labor when it comes to remote housing, Mr Deputy Speaker. But what they've done now is turn their backs on our urban centres, where they have the strong victory here in Darwin, over in Palmerston, where we see the CLP members, spouting how great it is to be the local members. We have seen them turn their back on Territorians when it comes to the injection of urban housing that we know is needed in our urban centres and particularly in our regional centres, Mr Deputy Speaker. So we would continue to advocate, continue to focus on that huge level of housing need in our urban and regional centres. And we do not, from the Labor opposition's perspective, do not understand, Mr Deputy Speaker, how the CLP can scrap some national targets that would actually make the Northern Territory a better place. When we can invest in housing, it's an investment in not just infrastructure, local businesses, the pipeline of works, more opportunities for trainees and apprenticeships, more opportunities to address social issues, more opportunities to grow the economy locally, scrapping those urban and regional housing targets and social affordable housing in particular is a very, very, very backwards move by the CLP government, who claim to be a government of action, Mr Deputy Speaker. We know, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the trend of the CLP government has become quite concerning, and we're only 6 months into a 4-year term of government. When the CLP said they had a plan for education, all they have given us are just truancy officers, and we love the fact that we have great people in education, but we want to see a holistic approach to education, Mr Deputy Speaker, not just a one process or one policy program from the Education Minister. We would love to see a full range of diverse programs and investment into education, because we know that the long-term investment in education means more opportunities for Territory kids, more opportunities for Territory young people, growing the economy, providing jobs, allowing our young people to thrive and to flourish here in the Territory. If they choose to leave the Territory, hopefully choose to come back and have careers and families here in the Northern Territory. But that investment, that early years investment, like the 3-year-old preschool, like what Labor committed to, like what the CLP has now scrapped, is not an investment into the future for young people in education. So the short-sightedness, Mr Deputy Speaker, of the CLP government is becoming more and more concerning, and we will continue to fearlessly point that out as the Labor opposition, but we will also ask those questions that the CLP government refused to answer or outline or plan for, and we will make sure we draw that attention in our role, because we know that Territorians are counting on us, Mr Deputy Speaker, to do just that. The CLP have said the plan for healthcare is the only thing that we have seen. They've said they have a plan for healthcare, but the only thing, unfortunately, Mr Deputy Speaker, that we have seen from the Health Minister, from the member for Barkly, is him hide away and run scared from the protests, the possible protests of our doctors, our regional and rural doctors, and any decision about the future care of health in the Northern Territory by the Health Minister is absolute cricket. So it'd be great to see, again, a vision, what kind of vision that the CLP government has. Does the Health Minister have a vision around health, how we reinvest into the health and wellbeing of Territorians? We are yet to see and hear, Mr Deputy Speaker. The CLP have said they have a master plan for corrections, and as we know today, we're very fortunate, honoured and privileged to have many of our Northern Territory correction officers in the gallery of Parliament, the People's Parliament, and unfortunately all we have seen the CLP do in their term of government so far is drive our prisons and our corrections staff to absolute breaking point. We've also heard directly, Mr Deputy Speaker, from the Northern Territory Police Association that the toll that is taking on police and our corrections staff who are working in the watch houses, in the overcrowded watch houses. No, we know prisons aren't supposed to be comfortable places for prisoners, Mr Deputy Speaker. We acknowledge that. I think that's one of the key lines that the Chief Minister's thrown away in the last 2 weeks. But we are asking for safe and protected environments for the staff, for the hardworking Territorians who do that job day in and day out, those professionals in corrections. It's not just a lifestyle choice. This is a professional job that our corrections staff do, and we want to make sure that they are supported. Our police also are doing the tough times with the extra responsibilities that are being placed on them by the CLP government, and we are not seeing any point where our corrections staff or our police officers who are minding the watch houses are giving any type of relief or reprieve by the CLP government. So again, we continue to ask those questions. We know there is a real fear, not just from police, not just from corrections staff, but also from our legal services, Mr Deputy Speaker, that someone will die in one of the watch houses. We know there's a real fear that one of our staff, our corrections staff, will be injured or worse on the job because they are at breaking point. So we look forward to hearing what the CLP government will do. We know that the catchphrases, the glossy media releases and the social media tiles and the smiling faces doesn't go further than actually having proper plans and actions. And as we're talking about the economy and the legislation at hand, what the economic toll is under the new government's regime. Mr Deputy Speaker, the payroll tax does not scratch the surface to properly support our local businesses here in the Territory. We know there will be many businesses that are based outside of the Territory who benefit, but our clear focus for the Labor opposition is what benefits will come to the Northern Territory and particularly our Territory businesses. And we would like to see more from the CLP government, apart from just their couple of populist announcements, which seem to completely void of the robust and solid economic plan and vision that most Territorians were expecting, maybe are expecting from the government. 6 months in, we're still yet to see. Mr Deputy Speaker, Territorians want to see more of their government, and so far, as we know, the CLP's go-slow approach, scrap things without any warning, wind up very important contracts for community and social services without any warning. 5-year contracts now on the brink of being cut on the 31st of March for things like the Back on Track program, which is around youth diversion and getting young people back on the right track, completely scrapped. So it's very disappointing. Mr Deputy Speaker, we will see nothing improve in the Territory in the long run if the short-sightedness and the vision of the CLP government remains. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.